everybody, I'm Kris White with the American Battlefield Trust, and I am excited to kick off our coverage of the 160th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. Yes, Gettysburg's how you're supposed to pronounce it. Everyone's going to make fun of me. Gettysburg, Gettysburg, Gettysburg. No, it's Gettysburg. But anyways, I'm really excited to be here. Are we in Gettysburg? No, we're actually at Chancellorsville. And you can't understand the Gettysburg Campaign without being here at Chancellorsville and understanding this battle. And we've just covered this battle from start to finish on our YouTube channel, so please check that out. Go check it out on YouTube, Facebook. You can see our other assets at battlefields.org, and you can learn more about Chancellorsville through our free battle app that we have for there, as well as the one we have for Gettysburg too. So you can go over to the iTunes store or over to the Google Play Store, download those free apps and learn more. But before we get into the nitty gritty of places like Brandy Station, Little Round Top, Seminary Ridge, and a lot of other places we're going to visit during this swing, we have to start back here at Chancellorsville. It's May of 1863. There's a great battle that takes place here. It's the great battle in the Eastern Theater prior to the rise of George Gordon Meade into the command of the Union Army of the Potomac, who fights at Gettysburg and who leads that army there. And it, of course, will be the last battle of Thomas Jonathan Jackson. We know him as Stonewall Jackson. And it will be Lee's greatest victory. It'll be one of his costliest victories. And not just because Jackson dies here, but the amount of carnage that's left behind will help to cripple this army. And over the last almost year, Lee's bled his army white. But to get to that point, to get to Gettysburg, we have to kind of back up a little bit. I'm going to bring on Kris Mackowski here to start talking a little bit about the wake of the Chancellorsville campaign. So we are Mr. F.J. Hooker, as Robert E. Lee loves to call Joe Hooker, Mr. Fighting Joe Hooker. It's a derisive little term that he makes for him. Hooker has lost the Battle of Chancellorsville. He outnumbered Lee by more than 2-1. He has about 135,000 men. Lee has anywhere between 60 and 65,000 men. And Lee comes into this wilderness, outmaneuvers. I don't want to say outfights the Army of the Potomac, because there's still a lot of fight in the Army of the Potomac, but he's definitely going to outlead them and outgeneral Joe Hooker. What are your thoughts on the end of the campaign before the death of Stonewall Jackson?
We've got a lot of different things that Lee's going to have to grapple with as he comes out of the immediate aftermath of this battle. Jackson is wounded on the 2nd of May, but he's still hanging on. The prognosis actually looks good. So Lee's not sure, do I plan to have him come back? How do I kind of deal with his absence in the short term? I still have a very angry, wounded Union Army on the north bank of the Rappahannock River, and Lee's got to figure out how to bring all these pieces together. He also has a lot of concern from Richmond that's kind of reaching up to him saying, hey, your First Corps, part of your First Corps under James Longstreet, it's been down in southeast Virginia, it's Suffolk, they're marching back up through Richmond. What if we keep them here in the capital and send them west to Mississippi to help out with the dire situation there? Because, of course, as Chancellorsville's happening here at the beginning of May of 1863, Ulysses S. Grant's coming across the Mississippi River and gets a lodgment in Jefferson Davis's home state. And as he starts moving around out there, Davis gets really nervous. And to send reinforcements, he wants to strip them from Lee. So Lee's trying to deal with all of this different context as he's trying to figure out how he might be able to take the initiative. But he's got his own government working against him. He's got a really big, angry enemy across the river, and he's got some severe command shortages that he's having to deal with. That's going to trickle down not just from Jackson himself, but all the way down to the division and the brigade levels, to the regimental levels. He's going to lose so many regimental commanders, so many brigade, division commanders, that we're going to start to see an important leadership vacuum develop that's really going to haunt Lee over the whole rest of this year and really set him up, I think, for a very difficult campaign in 1864. So that's kind of what's on Lee's mind. Really big stuff in the aftermath of this terrible battle.
Yeah, I have to add that Lee is the victim of his own success. He's won so many times that Jefferson Davis and others in the Confederacy are saying, if he's done this well with 60,000 men, what could he do with 40,000 men? These are big questions. And we have to remember that Robert E. Lee has to be focused on his theater of the war, and that's specifically Virginia into the northern part of North Carolina. So he's very focused there, but understands that there's a bigger political and game to be played here, especially out in the Western theater, where you're getting from the trans-Mississippi or beyond the Mississippi, you know, lead from Arkansas, Texas cattle, other things that are going to be helping to supply that Southern Confederacy. So you have to keep that back door open down to Texas, Arkansas, and other places like that. Give me 1 second, Chris. And then also, we now have to reorganize our army. By May 7th, Stonewall Jackson's still alive. We don't think he's going to die. That's the day he's really going to start taking a turn, but Lee doesn't know this. Lee's already reorganizing his army. He's already trying to promote men like Robert Rhodes, Edward Allegheny Johnson. He has to really rethink how he's going to restructure this army, and it's something he thought about for a while. Going from 2 corps, one under James Longstreet, one under Stonewall Jackson, 40,000 men versus 38,000 men, and then breaking them up into a 3rd corps, which will eventually come about, which we know from the Gettysburg Campaign will be led by the inept Ambrose Powell Hill, who will bungle his way into Gettysburg on July 1st. And when Lee shows up at Cashtown on July 1st asking what's going on ahead, Hill will basically say to him, I don't know. You know, saying to Robert E. Lee, what's going on down the road when they're cannon booming? I can't believe that even happened. But nonetheless, that's what we're going to start to see over the next few weeks. And Joe Hooker's army is going to have a whole different look too.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of chime in when you talk about Lee's level of influence extending down to North Carolina. Here's a little bit of irony. After Fredericksburg, one of the thorns in his side was D.H. Hill, who in very Lee-like fashion gets transferred out of the army. Where does he go? North Carolina. Here's a point where Lee's looking to hold on to his army. He's looking for reinforcements of his own. Who does he have to deal with but a really cranky D.H. Hill in North Carolina, who won't give up his own troops and is trying to say, like, no, send Lee's guys out west. So, you know, that comes back to bite Lee in a pretty inconvenient way.
Yeah. And on the other side, we have Joe Hooker. Hooker, who had talked a big game prior to Chancellorsville, had done a great job reorganizing the Army of the Potomac, reinvigorating it, and resupplying it. Things that had fallen to the wayside since George McClellan had left, and Ambrose Burnside just was an administrator, or a battlefield general for that matter, as an army leader. And Joe Hooker re-inspired this army. And when they came to Chancellorsville, he was told by Abraham Lincoln, in these fields, and we're standing right out where the 11th Corps was swept off the field here at Chancellorsville, he is told to put in all of your men in the next battle. That's what Lincoln will tell to Hooker, and Hooker doesn't do that. He, in fact, is going to leave a large chunk of his army out of the action, including most of the 5th Corps. John Fulton Reynolds and his 1st Corps, they sustained less than 200 casualties during this campaign. But when this army pulls back across the Rappahannock on May 6th, they are kind of surprised. You know, there's one man who said it perfectly from the United States regulars. He said, at Chancellorsville, we were not defeated, but we did not defeat. And that meant we went out there, we didn't win, but we didn't lose. And that's what's this chip on the shoulder that's going to be carried north towards Gettysburg. And that's what's going to help bring that army together. And ironically, the Confederates worked very well here together under a number of different circumstances. I'll encourage you to go back and watch our 160 videos of Chancellorsville. But we had Lee, who acted as a wing commander, an army commander, and a corps commander at times. We had Stonewall Jackson, who went off and operated independently. We had men step into roles where they had never been before, like Robert Rhodes at division level and Jeb Stuart at corps level of infantry of all things. We'll see that at Gettysburg, and we'll see the reverse for the Confederates. As Kris pointed out, Kris Mackowski, the bleeding of the white of this army that will happen here at Chancellorsville, 64 out of his 130 regimental commanders will go down. We'll have 9 general officers going down, wounded, killed, or captured. This is going to be the end of a bloodletting. And if we look all the way back to the peninsula when Lee took over this army, and if we go through the Gettysburg Campaign and we look pound for pound his casualties, he started off the peninsula, or the 7 days battles, with 92,500 men, and he ends at Gettysburg, and over that 13-month span, roughly, he lost 91,000 men. It's almost one man for a one-on-one for these men going down. It's a 1-to-1 ratio, nearly. So this is what we're looking at. But Hooker's his own worst enemy. Hooker's a braggart. He's a liar. He's all these different things. I'd love to meet him. I'd love to have dinner with him. In fact, I wouldn't believe anything that he says, but I'm going to be entertained. But Hooker had created his own problems. For so long, he had backstabbed people to get this job, and now it's coming to a head. And one of the problems that we have in both of these armies in the Eastern Theater is how close we are to both capitals. Richmond, Virginia is off in that direction, 50 miles from where we're standing, or about 55 miles to the south of us. DC is about 50 miles in that direction to the north. That means politicians can come to these armies. And that's what happens in the wake of Chancellorsville. The governor of Pennsylvania, Andrew Curtin, shows up, and he starts to meet with men like John Fulton Reynolds and George Gordon Meade, both corps commanders at this time, commanding the 1st and 5th Corps respectively, and on top of it, they're both Pennsylvanians. He's going to want to know what had happened, what had gone wrong. Other governors will come down here, senators, congressmen. They will come down here and try to figure out what the problem is. And in December of 1862, Ambrose Burnside, the former commander here of the Army of the Potomac, had a coup d'etat of sorts against him. There was a rising of the generals who went to D.C. and talked bad to Lincoln, and Lincoln stops another campaign after Fredericksburg. So now we had set in motion here a disease, and it's insubordination within the Army of the Potomac at times, and its high command. It's kind of stamped out after Fredericksburg, but it starts to rear its head again after Chancellorsville. And one of the leaders will eventually be the second in command of the Army, a guy named Henry Warner Slocum, 35 years old, West Point graduate, and a New Yorker who hates, loathes, just despises Joe Hooker. And he will write to anybody who will listen about how terrible Hooker is. And he's going to push men like Meade, Reynolds, and others to try to get into command. Meade and some of them will try to take the high road, while others will backstab Joe Hooker, and Hooker will backstab others. And this will start off a campaign internally for the Union Army where they're fighting with each other, which means that distracts them long enough so that Lee, over on this side of the river, can reorganize his army, bring in reinforcements from places like D.H. Hill in North Carolina and other places, rebuild that army to be about 78,000-ish men, and then move out to the west to a place called Brandy Station, about 25 miles to the west of us, where they will then start to turn north from Culpeper and go towards the Potomac River, take the war out of this area. But what happens, how are they able to do this? Number one, they won the Battle of Chancellorsville. But again, the Union Army didn't feel defeated. Many of them thought they were just going to go back across the river and come back and fight. Now that they have to have this internal struggle at the highest command structure of the Army of the Potomac, that cripples that army, but gives Lee the time to reorganize and move forward. Now, that's not to say Lee doesn't have his own problems. May 15th, 1863, Stonewall Jackson is buried in Lexington, Virginia. Robert E. Lee's not there. He's in Richmond. He is petitioning to the War Department, and specifically Jefferson Davis, the President of the Confederacy, to make sure that he gets more men and that he is not sent out to the west where his men are sent west, but rather he can go north across the Potomac River. He'll spend a few days in Richmond, get the green light, and he will reorganize the army into 3 corps. The first under James Longstreet, his old warhorse. The second under Richard Stoddard Ewell. Then we have A.P. Hill, West Point graduate of the class of 1847, taking over 3rd Corps. The march will go out to the west and then start heading up from Culpeper towards the Potomac River.
And something that's really important to remember as we reorganize that Confederate Army is it's not just about getting the right person in the right place, or in Lee's case, we're trying to get the right person available in the right place, but command styles are dramatically different. When we elevate Ewell and Hill to Corps Command, remember that as division commanders under Jackson, they were used to explicit orders, being told what they needed to know, when they needed to know it, no more than that. Lee has a much different command style. And so we'll see as the Gettysburg Campaign unfolds, he offers discretionary orders. He's like, I kind of want this to happen. You figure out how to do it. Hill and Ewell have not been trained how to operate in that context. Lee doesn't realize that. And so one of the things we'll challenge you to look at as the campaign unfolds is how Lee tries to learn how to use an army, how these commanders have to try to learn how to be commanded. And that's going to pose significant problems for the Army of Northern Virginia as it moves forward. Same thing is going to happen to a lesser extent on the Union side. Kris talked about all of that infighting and that bickering. It's going to come from Lincoln all the way down. Lincoln says to Hooker, you can't talk to me directly anymore. You have to go through Henry Halleck, General-in-Chief of the Army. Halleck and Hooker hate each other, so that's going to add some levels of problems. Darius Couch, 2nd Corps Commander, is going to refuse to serve under Hooker and ask to be transferred, where he'll go to the Department of the Susquehanna. He'll be up in Harrisburg. Who's his replacement? Well, we're going to see the rise of Winfield Scott Hancock, which is going to have huge implications when we finally get up to Gettysburg. Henry Slocum, not liking him at all. Things are going to be problematic. George Gordon Meade, as 5th Corps commander, when he gets the order to assume command of the Army, he thinks it's Hooker sending someone to arrest him because relations between Hooker and Meade deteriorate so badly after this Battle of Chancellorsville. So both armies are going to have lots of issues to deal with. I'm also going to challenge you to look at the story of folks like Oliver Otis Howard, who has a disastrous day on this very field on the 2nd of May, 1863. And when he gets to Gettysburg and he's placed once more on the flank of the Union Army, we're going to see serious repercussions and echoes of what happened on this very ground. I'm going to invite you to look at Dan Sickles, who here at Chancellorsville has a position that is in advance of the rest of the Union line, piece of high ground, looks fantastic, and he's ordered to give that up. How does that decision on the early morning hours of May 3rd impact his decision on July 2nd, 1862, when he sees a piece of high ground elevated in front of the main Union line? And so we're going to see lots of echoes between Chancellorsville and Gettysburg, and the decisions they make there are directly influenced and informed by what happens here at Chancellorsville.
Yeah, and just to wrap it up, just to kind of tie in what Kris was saying, we do have new command structures that will take effect. In Lee's army, we're going to have an entirely new corps with two of the 3 division commanders in that corps being brand new to division command. Henry Heath and William Dorsey Pender. The third one who will be in there is Richard Heron Anderson. Anderson does have a lot of experience, but A.P. Hill is new to Corps Command, and if you ask me, he peaked at Antietam. That was the peak of his career. Here at Chancellorsville, I'm not going to say he was wounded. I'm not going to say he wasn't wounded. He was allegedly hit in the back of the leg by a shell and bruised so badly he didn't want to ride his horse. But if you read some letters about him not being wanted to blame for anything that Stonewall Jackson did or didn't do, it might have something to do with it. So check out our video about that from our 160th Chancellorsville. Then when you look at the Union side of things, George Gordon Meade is not the senior corps commander. Whenever he is marching away from this battlefield or marching towards Gettysburg, he's outranked by guys like John Sedgwick, Henry Slocum. He was outranked by John Fulton Reynolds. I mean, he is lower in the pecking order than you would think. But as people are offered the job of the Army of the Potomac commander, the premier army in the United States Army, I don't want that job. I don't want that job. Give it to that guy. Give it to that guy. It just turned out that George Gordon Meade was the guy who couldn't turn it down because he was ordered to take it over. Think about that. You have to go up against Robert E. Lee, who by the time you enter the Gettysburg Campaign, he had lost in Western Virginia, he had won on the Peninsula, he had won during the Second Manassas Campaign, ties at Antietam, wins Fredericksburg, and then goes on to Chancellorsville where he wins again. So this is a guy who knows how to win, and you're going to have to go up against the best of the best in the Confederacy. So it's a job that people don't want. So when you come out of here, what you're coming into is an army that had been rebuilt for the Army of the Potomac. It has higher morale than most people give it credit for. It just has a top-level command problem. The Confederates now, that trickle-down effect is starting to carry over from places like Antietam, the 7 Days battles, Fredericksburg, specifically here at Chancellorsville, where they lose more than 8,000 men on May 3rd alone. It's going to trickle down, and there's never anyone, as the war goes on, or there's rarely anyone who can step up to the next level to keep carrying it forward. So these are things we're going to explore, and we're going to see people like that you normally know, like Gary Edelman. We're going to see Tim Smith of the East. We're going to see Wayne Motch, Jim Hessler, Carol Reardon. We've got all kinds of folks coming out who are going to join us. We're really excited, so we hope that you will check out all of our 160 coverage. We're going to be heading off to Brandy Station next. That'll be us kicking off this campaign with our own Dan Davis leading the Cav charge out there from June 9th, 1863, and I'm sure this guy named Custer is going to probably come up at some point with Dan Davis. So we really want to encourage you to go back and watch Chancellorsville, because you can't understand Gettysburg without learning more about Chancellorsville. Check out the Chancellorsville Battle app, check out our Gettysburg app, and check out all the coverage that we're going to have here on YouTube of places like Vicksburg, Baton Rouge, Mine Run later this year, here at Chancellorsville, Gettysburg, and beyond. So on behalf of the American Battlefield Trust, thanks Sarah Byerly behind the camera, Kris Mackowski, I'm Kris White. Thank you for watching, and thank you for supporting battlefield preservation and education.